Hi everyone, I'm Joe Mealing for Weaver Leathercraft, and I want to welcome you back to this introduction on floral carving. Today we're going to be talking about our swivel knife. I'm going to go over a few different practice techniques, kind of how we want to run that knife to try to achieve nice smooth cuts, and then we're going to go over to our project piece that we're working on and get our pattern that we transferred cut in and ready to finish tooling. So let's head over to the bench and get started. Okay, anytime before we cut, we're gonna make sure that our leather has plenty of moisture in it. So this is just plain water again that we're gonna wet that down with. As you can see, that water's kind of soaking in there and getting to be a little bit drier. That leather's gonna take up that water and get a good moisture content in it. Now, trying to cut leather that's too dry, you won't get a very deep cut and it'll feel like that knife is really dragging through your leather. Likewise, if it's too wet, it'll be real spongy and mushy. So through practice, you're gonna find out that right content, but you're gonna be able to tell through the look, like through the color, through the feel of your knife. And when we're working with your other tools, as you're hitting them down, you'll be able to start telling that feel, whether you're getting too dry or too wet. But when we hold our knife, you want your cradle, it's going to be this part up here that spins. I usually like that just about where that first knuckle is. So I'm going to set that knife right into that cradle right there. My other two fingers here, I'm going to take my middle finger and my thumb, and those are going to grip the barrel of my knife. Now that's where all of your turn is going to come from, is from those fingers spinning that blade. My ring finger, I usually hold right down next to that blade as almost kind of some stability as I make those cuts. So that's a look on how that knife is held when I hold that in my hands. My pinky, I'll usually keep that held out and use that as downward pressure for a guide as I work through the leather. Okay, we always want to draw your knife back towards you. Okay, now you guys are facing me with this camera, so obviously back towards me is going to look like it's going away from you. But by drawing that back towards me, I'm looking at where I'm going. Okay, if I'm pushing away, all I'm seeing is where I've been. And just like in life, it's more important to know where you're going than where you've been, right? So I'm going to try to lock my wrist and almost lock my elbow and be pulling with my whole body here, clear from the shoulder, to make some straight cuts. Okay, we're gonna start deep with your cuts and fade out. When you see that up close, where that has started deep and then faded out. Can't hardly see where it ends at. Okay, my knife blade, if it's going to be flat there, I'm going to tip that away from me just a little bit so this front toe of that blade isn't catching as I'm trying to drag. So I want to pick that edge up out of the leather and be able to drag smoothly. Okay, so I want you to practice some nice straight cuts. Just starting deep and fading out to light. Okay, that's really just practicing on getting the feel of that fading out as you go. That's going to come into play later when we talk about getting your cuts to flow and keeping that pattern flowing all the way through your floral work. Next, I want you to practice cuts both to the left and to the right. Work on making a little half arch. Okay, now what's a common mistake is you want to be able to see where you're going. So you'll see people really tipping that blade to watch out around there. But what we don't want to get is what's called an undercut. Okay, I want you to see this up close, the difference between these two cuts. Okay, do you see that top one? where there's that undercut, we don't want that extra flap to be something that can pick up. Okay, we want nice smooth cuts like this here. And that's going to come from your blade being straight up and down and not angled. So again, practice some cuts going both ways. And this is a great practice exercise, no matter how much you've been tooling, to really work on fading those cuts. Okay, and you'll notice these cuts are going to fade towards each other, but not actually cross. From there, we can work to build that together. And fade more cuts in there. So with that practice, you're going to start developing what looks a lot like some different decorative cuts. Okay, when we get towards the end of your floral work, we'll bring in decorative cuts at the very end. So that'll be later after we get done tooling the rest of your pattern. Let's set our practice piece aside and pull over our pattern that we've transferred onto our leather for the small journal cover. Now again, we want to make sure we have our moisture in there. So I'm going to give a real light coat of water with my natural sponge. Okay, now remember when we transfer these lines onto our leather, that's a guideline. We don't have to be exact. If you see you went off a little bit when you were transferring a line, it's more important to have a nice, smooth, even cut with your knife, as that's laying the foundation for your entire project here. So I'm going to start rolling these knife cuts here. Again, I'm going to start a little deeper with them and then fade those cuts out. These ones that come through the middle of the vine. And you'll also notice that I move my leather quite a bit. It's important to keep that cut flowing smooth, so sometimes it's easier to move not only your knife but your leather at the same time to help keep that nice and smooth around there. If you have to, pause, move things a little bit more, and then continue. The less times that you have to start and stop a cut, the less chance you're going to get to have that looking really choppy. Now as you cut through a pattern, it doesn't really matter what you cut first. Whether you cut your flowers first or start at the top of the pattern, work down, you're going to get some habits set in place as you learn to tool. And anything you do there is really going to be okay, because at the end of the day, all of those lines are going to need cut in before we move on to our next tool and get started beveling. Get a couple more lines cut in here. Give you a little more of a close-up shot on what we're doing. Okay. See those lines starting to get cut in there. Still got about half the pattern to go. Now I want to start those cuts deep, fade them out to light. Remembering though that like this particular leather in the kit is a little bit thinner, so we don't want to cut through the leather. Okay, as long as you're not cutting through, you're doing fine. If you start feeling the marble with your knife, you've gone too far. And as I come around those tight curves too, you'll notice I have that blade tipped just a little bit more. And by tipping that blade further away from me, it creates a narrower blade essentially, so I can make it around that curve without the end of my blade catching and dragging around on that leather. Another big conversation with swivel knives is how do we sharpen them, or how sharp should we keep them? Now, I tool with a little bit duller knife than a lot of people do. I find it's smooth and consistent, and I just really get along with that better. However, it's good to keep up on your blades with polishing them, which you can do with a process called stropping. Now, to strop a blade, you would have a scrap piece of leather and put jeweler's rouge on the back of that. From there, holding that blade at a nice angle, the same as the angle on the blade, you can drag that back, being nice and consistent, being careful not to roll that blade as you drag it. Strop that a few times and then go back to cutting. And all that's going to do is keep a nice polish on that blade. Again, you can see me turn this leather a lot as I'm moving around the pattern. Always wanting to be drawing my cuts to me and not pushing them away. Keep nice smooth cuts, good control on my knife. It's better to go just a little bit slower if you need to, and make sure they're nice, smooth, even cuts. Okay, there we go. We have our pattern cut in and ready to go. On behalf of Weaver Leathercraft, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to watch this video today. Follow along as we work through our tools and bring this pattern to life in this introduction to floral carving series.